December 16th, 1985, 5:15 in the afternoon. Spark Steakhouse, 210 East 46th Street, Manhattan. Paul Castellano stepped out of a black Lincoln and took 6 bullets to the head and chest on a freezing midtown sidewalk. The boss of the Gambinos was dead before his body hit the pavement. And while every newspaper in America screamed about John Gotti and the changing of the guard north in a federal courthouse in Brooklyn, another mob story was quietly ending. Not with bullets, with paperwork, with a sentencing memo, with a judge's gavel. Jimmy Burke, the man Robert De Niro would later play in Goodfellas, was being processed into a federal cell where he would die. And nobody, not one journalist in America that morning, was connecting the dots back to where it all really started, a college basketball game in 1978. You think you know this story. You've seen the movie. Henry Hill, Tommy DeVito, Jimmy Conway, the Lufthansa heist, the helicopter buzzing the house, the egg noodles and ketchup at the end. Martin Scorsese gave you a masterpiece. But he also gave you a lie of omission, because the film blames Henry's drug arrest for the collapse of the Vario crew. Henry gets pinched in May 1980. The cocaine empire crumbles. He flips. End of story. That's the Hollywood version. The truth is uglier. The truth is bigger. The truth is that the entire Lucchese Street operation in Queens, an organization that ran for 30 years and earned tens of millions of dollars, was already dying before Henry's phone ever got tapped. And the cause of death wasn't heroin. It wasn't cocaine. It wasn't even the Lufthansa heist. This is the story of how one-point shaving scheme that nobody talks about toppled an entire criminal empire. How a fixed basketball game in Boston set off a chain reaction that put Jimmy Burke in prison for life, killed Paul Vario behind bars, and dismantled every made man in the Roberts Lounge crew by 1986. This is the crime Goodfellas left out. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. But here's what nobody in Hollywood wanted to tell you. The man who engineered the whole thing wasn't Jimmy Burke. It wasn't Henry Hill either. It was a small-time bookmaker from Pittsburgh named Anthony Perla, and a Boston College forward who needed $2,500. That's all it took. $2,500 and a phone call to start the dominoes falling. Go back to 1978. Henry Hill is 35 years old. Stocky, dark hair, slicked back, a cigarette always burning between 2 fingers. He lives in Rockville Center with his wife Karen and 2 daughters. He drives a Cadillac. He eats at Don Pepe's. He answers to Paul Vario, the capo who ran the Lucchese family's Brownsville, Brooklyn faction out of a junkyard on Flatlands Avenue. Hill wasn't made. He couldn't be. His father was Irish. But he was Paulie's earner, Paulie's pet, the kid Paulie watched grow up from a 12-year-old running coffee at the cab stand at 11410 Rockaway Boulevard. And then there was Jimmy Burke, James Burke, 47 years old in 78, 6 feet tall, 200 pounds, gray eyes that didn't blink. Burke grew up bouncing through foster homes in upstate New York, beaten as a child, abandoned. By the time he was a teenager, he was already hijacking trucks. By his 30s, he ran a crew of hijackers and killers out of Roberts Lounge, his bar on Lefferts Boulevard in South Ozone Park, Queens. They called him the Gent because he tipped well. He also, according to FBI estimates, killed somewhere between 20 and 50 people in his lifetime. Burke wasn't made either. Same problem as Henry, Irish blood. But he was Vario's most trusted associate, and his crew earned more for the Lucchese family than most of their official captains. The opportunity came in the summer of 78. Henry was in Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary doing time for a beating in Tampa. Inside, he met a hustler named Paul Mazzei, who knew a bookmaker named Rocco Perla, whose brother Anthony Perla knew a kid named Rick Kuhn. Kuhn was a 6'6" junior forward on the Boston College basketball team. He was averaging 8 points a game. He was broke. And his roommate, Jim Sweeney, was the starting point guard. The proposition Anthony Perla made to Kuhn in the fall of 78 was simple. Don't lose games. Just don't cover the spread. Miss a few shots. Throw a couple passes. Get the team to win by less than Vegas expected. Each fixed game would pay Kuhn $2,500. Eventually, they pulled in a forward named Ernie Cobb and tried to bring in Sweeney, too. Here's how the scheme worked. Bookmakers set a point spread. Boston College is favored by 10. Bet the under, and you win if they win by less than 10 or lose outright. The fix was elegant because nobody had to throw the game. The players just had to underperform within the spread. Easier on the conscience, easier on detection. The Perla brothers needed muscle. They needed a banker. They needed somebody who could move serious cash through serious bookmakers across the East Coast without anybody asking questions. They needed Henry Hill. Henry brought it to Jimmy Burke. Jimmy said yes. From December 16, 1978 through March of 79, the Burke-Hill Perla operation fixed 9 Boston College games, or tried to. The accounts vary on how many actually broke their way. Some games the players underperformed and the bets cashed. Other games Kuhn played well by accident, and the crew lost money. What's documented is this. Tens of thousands of dollars moved through bookmakers in Pittsburgh, New York, and Las Vegas. Burke flew Kuhn to New York for meetings at the Stage Deli. Henry handed the kid envelopes of cash in hotel rooms. And the entire operation was, from start to finish, sloppy, loud phone calls, bragging in bars, players who got cold feet and threatened to talk. It was the kind of scheme Jimmy Burke usually never touched, because Burke's whole reputation was built on discipline. But the money was too easy. And that's the first lesson here. When a careful man gets greedy, he stops being careful. While the point-shaving scheme was burning through the spring of 79, something else was building. The DEA had been watching a heroin and cocaine pipeline running from Pittsburgh to New York for almost 2 years. They called it the Pittsburgh Connection. Henry Hill, freshly out of Lewisburg, was wired into it through that same Paul Mazzi he'd met in prison. Henry was moving multi-kilo loads of cocaine and heroin between Pittsburgh and Queens, using his wife Karen as a courier, paying off cops, hiding dope in his daughter's stuffed animals. Paul Vario had given Henry a direct order: stay out of the drug business. The Lucchese family had a standing rule: no narcotics, too much federal heat, too many life sentences. Vario had said it to Henry's face: if I find out you're dealing, you're dead. Henry did it anyway. So did Jimmy. Now you have to understand what's happening in parallel. December 11th, 1978, 6 men in ski masks walk into the Lufthansa cargo terminal at Kennedy Airport. They walk out 47 minutes later with $5.875 million in cash and $1 million in jewelry. Biggest cash robbery in American history at that point. Jimmy Burke organized it. Henry helped set it up through an inside man named Louis Werner. And then, over the next 6 months, Jimmy Burke murdered nearly everyone connected to the heist: Tommy DeSimone, Stax Edwards, Marty Krugman, Joe Buddha Manry, Louis Kafora. Their bodies turned up in trunks of cars, in meat trucks, in vacant lots in Brooklyn. Some never turned up at all. Burke wasn't cleaning up loose ends. He was eliminating witnesses before they could become witnesses, and he was doing it while the Boston College thing was unraveling. And while the DEA was closing in on the Pittsburgh dope pipeline, 3 federal investigations, 1 crew, tick, tick, tick. May 2nd, 1980, Nassau County narcotics detectives, working with the DEA, arrested Henry Hill outside his home in Rockville Center. They'd been wiretapping his phone for weeks. They had him on tape arranging drug shipments. They had Karen on tape, too. Henry was looking at 25 years federal time on a drug conspiracy. And here's where the dam broke. Henry sat in jail for a few weeks. He thought about Paul Vario. He thought about Jimmy Burke. He thought about all those bodies from Lufthansa, and the fact that he was the last loose end Jimmy hadn't killed yet. On May 27th, 1980, Henry Hill agreed to become a cooperating witness for the federal government. Witness protection. Total flip. 25 years of mafia secrets, traded for his life. What Henry knew was staggering. He knew about Lufthansa. He knew about the murders. He knew about the cab stand and the junkyard and the loan sharking and the hijackings. But the case that was easiest to make, the one with the cleanest paper trail, the one with phone records and bank records and willing college kids who could be flipped and put on a witness stand, was the Boston College point-shaving scheme. That's the case the prosecutors built first. That's the case they used to put Jimmy Burke in federal prison. Now think about the irony for a second. Burke had killed at least a dozen people. He'd robbed Lufthansa for almost $7 million. He'd been hijacking trucks at Kennedy Airport for 20 years. And the thing that finally caught him, the thing that ended Jimmy the Gent Burke, was a college basketball scheme that netted, depending on which prosecutor you ask, somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000. He'd risked everything for pocket change. November 16th, 1982. United States District Court, Eastern District of New York. Jimmy Burke was convicted on federal racketeering charges connected to the Boston College point-shaving conspiracy. Henry Hill testified against him. Paul Mazzei testified against him. Rick Kuhn was convicted too and got 10 years, the longest sentence ever handed to a college athlete for game fixing. Burke got 20 years. He was 51 years old. He'd never see Robert's Lounge again. He'd never see his wife Mickey again as a free man, and he was sitting in a federal cell when the next indictment came down. Because Henry kept talking. He talked about a man named Richard Eaton, a smooth-talking con artist who had ripped off Jimmy Burke on a cocaine deal in 1979. Eaton had taken $250,000 from Burke and disappeared. When Burke finally found him, he strangled him in a Brooklyn meat locker and dumped his body in an abandoned tractor trailer on Bergen Street. The body wasn't found for 2 months. It was frozen. Henry knew the whole story because Jimmy had told him. February 1985, New York State Supreme Court. Jimmy Burke was convicted of the murder of Richard Eaton. Sentence, 20 years to life. He was now 54 years old, already serving 20 years on the Boston College case, and now staring down a life sentence on top of it. He would die in prison from lung cancer in April 1996 in a Buffalo State facility at 64 years old. The man Robert De Niro made famous, dead in a prison hospital bed, alone. But here's what the movie never told you. The Boston College case wasn't just about Jimmy Burke. The federal prosecutors had built a much bigger picture. They had Henry on tape. They had Paul Vario on tape, too, in conversations from the cab stand. And in 1984, the same prosecution team that had taken down Burke went after Paulie. The charge was extortion. Specifically, helping Henry Hill obtain a no-show prison job to facilitate his early release in '78, a small charge, a 4-year sentence, almost a slap on the wrist for a man who'd been a Lucchese capo for 40 years. But here's the thing about a man in his early 70s in federal prison. 4 years can be a death sentence. Paul Vario went into federal custody in 1984. He died of respiratory failure in Fort Worth Federal Prison on May 3, 1988. He was 73 years old. The cab stand at 11410 Rockaway Boulevard was already shuttered. Robert's Lounge was already sold off. The crew was already scattered. Look at the timeline. 1978, the Boston College fix begins. 1979, the DEA's Pittsburgh Connection case starts pulling threads. 1980, Henry Hill flips. 1982, Burke convicted in the BC case. 20 years. 1984, Vario convicted on the no-show job. 4 years. 1985, Burke convicted of the Eaton murder. Life. 1988, Vario dies in Fort Worth. 1996, Burke dies in Buffalo. By 1986, every made guy and every associate in the Vario regime was either in a federal cell, dead, or so old and isolated they couldn't operate anymore. The Brownsville East New York crew that had run hijackings and loan sharking and bookmaking out of Queens for 30 years simply ceased to exist. And it all started with a phone call to a 6'6" forward who needed $2,500. You want to know why this matters? because it tells you something true about how organized crime actually dies. It doesn't die in a hail of bullets. It doesn't die in a courtroom showdown like in the movies. It dies the way Jimmy Burke died, slowly, quietly, from a series of small mistakes that compound into a single inescapable catastrophe. Burke didn't get caught for Lufthansa. The Lufthansa case was never solved. Only Louis Werner, the inside man at the airport, was ever convicted for it. Every other participant either died or was never charged. Burke didn't get caught for the dozen-plus murders he committed. He got caught because he chased $50,000 in a college basketball scheme that he didn't even need. He had millions in Lufthansa cash sitting in safety deposit boxes. He didn't need Rick Kuhn. He didn't need the Perla brothers. He didn't need Henry's cocaine racket. He just couldn't say no. That's the pattern. That's the truth, Scorsese softened. Henry Hill's drug bust didn't bring down the Vario crew. The drug bust was the trigger. But the gun had been loaded by Burke's own greed 3 years earlier, when he agreed to muscle a college basketball point shaving scheme he should have walked away from. Once that case existed, once those phone records were on tape, once Rick Kuhn and Jim Sweeney were sweating in front of federal prosecutors, Henry's flip was just the match. The kindling had been there since '78. And there's one more piece to this. The Lucchese family itself learned from the Vario disaster. Vic Amuso and Anthony Casso, who took over the family in the late '80s, became two of the most violent and paranoid bosses in mob history, specifically because they watched what happened in Brownsville. They saw a capo lose control of his crew. They saw an associate flip and bring down 20 years of business. They saw the federal government use a college basketball scheme to unravel a hijacking empire. Their response was to start killing anyone they even suspected might cooperate. Between 1986 and 1991, Amuso and Casso are believed to have ordered more than 30 murders. They were trying to make sure no future Henry Hill could ever exist. It didn't work. Casso himself flipped in 1994. But that paranoia, that bloodletting, traces directly back to the Vario crew's collapse. The ghosts of Robert's Lounge haunted the entire Lucchese family for a decade. Here's the final irony. Henry Hill lived. He went into witness protection, got kicked out for committing more crimes, gave interviews, drank himself sick, and died of complications from heart disease on June 12, 2012, in a Los Angeles hospital. He was 69 years old. He outlived Jimmy Burke by 16 years. He outlived Paul Vario by 24 years. He outlived Tommy DeSimone, who'd been killed in 1979 on Lucchese orders. He outlived almost every person he'd ever betrayed, and in his final years, he sold autographed cookbooks online and made appearances at true crime conventions, signing photos for $50 apiece. The rat got rich off his own crimes. The killers died in cells. Goodfellas ended with Henry eating egg noodles and ketchup in a suburban kitchen, complaining about being an average nobody. The real story ended somewhere else entirely. The real story ended in a Buffalo prison ward with Jimmy Burke wasting away from cancer. It ended in a Fort Worth medical facility with Paul Vario gasping his last breath. It ended in a closed-up junkyard on Flatlands Avenue, the cab stand silent, the social club shuttered, the entire ecosystem of a 30-year criminal enterprise reduced to court documents and prison death certificates. Every man in that crew was either dead or in a federal cell by 1990. Every one. The empire didn't fall because of cocaine. It fell because Jimmy Burke couldn't walk away from $2,500 a game. And the man who pulled the thread didn't even know he was pulling it. Henry Hill, sitting in a Nassau County jail cell in May of '80, just wanted to save his own skin. He didn't realize he was holding the loose end of a sweater that, when he started talking, would unravel an entire world. That's the crime Goodfellas left out. A bunch of college kids in Boston, a forward who needed pocket money, a bookmaker from Pittsburgh, and an Irish gangster who couldn't say no to easy cash. They never put it in the movie because it doesn't fit the myth. The myth is helicopters and cocaine and a wife flushing dope down a toilet. The reality is a quiet federal indictment in November of '82 for fixing basketball games. That's what killed the Vario crew. Not Henry's heroin, not the FBI, not even Lufthansa. A fixed jump shot in a college gym. And once you know that, you'll never watch Goodfellas the same way again.